Wonder Egg priority is pretty bad. Should I ever come across someone in the wilderness that asks me how I feel about Wonder Egg priority, that's probably the first thing I'd say. But that statement is horrendously reductive. The overall sentiment is pretty accurate, but it's still an excessively broad statement, bursting at the seams as it desperately tries to contain how I feel about this anime. On one side, you have the overwhelming negativity brought upon by Wonder Egg's infamously awful ending, an ending that absolutely destroys everything that the anime worked hard to build and leaves just an utterly bitter taste in the viewer's mouth. It's frankly one of the most astounding things I've ever seen. You'd expect the other side, then, to be positivity, that there are things I liked about Wonder Egg Priority tragically anchored down by the ending. That part is true, but I wouldn't categorize that under positivity. Instead, that other side is the feeling that's been haunting me the entire time I've been making this video and why it has been so difficult to properly complete this project. Uncertainty. If there is one takeaway from this entire video, then it is this. I am not the right person to be making a video about Wonder Egg Priority. A glowing recommendation of my own content, I know. As you'll see in this video, my general sentiment on the anime is overwhelmingly negative. Even before the train wreck of an ending bulldozed the anime, I thought most of it was okay at best. I could see some of the positive qualities present here and there, and while I was never enamored with any of it, I could still respect what they were trying to go for. But as it stands, I don't like the anime enough to properly give credit to the things it does well. Unfortunately, the best I can offer are surface level compliments. But as work on this video kept dragging on longer and longer and the entire project slowed to a crawl, the more and more I became certain that there were things I didn't see, deeper messages, themes, and revelations that I failed to grasp. To simply put it, I didn't get it. But this is where the uncertainty stems from. Should these deeper messages, themes, and revelations exist and I suddenly understood them, I don't think it would shift the compass. I don't see any world in which my sentiment can be anything but overwhelmingly negative. The ending has poisoned Wonder Egg so badly that anything new that might try to grow out of it will inevitably die. It's a tragedy, honestly. I can see that there's care and effort put into this anime. It's just too bad that Wonder Egg Priority drowns itself in its finale. I want to talk about the ending. That's the whole reason I began working on this video. The worst parts of Wonder Egg Priority are absolutely fascinating and I can't resist talking about it. If I could jump straight into talking about the ending, that would be lovely, but talking about the ending requires context. Both things inside and outside of Wonder Egg Priority are important to talk about. If you amputated episodes 11, 12, and the special episode from the rest of the anime and looked at them, they're fine. Not amazing, but fine. But that's because you wouldn't know what these episodes ruined. You're looking at a bowl, but not the china shop. It doesn't help that even merely describing Wonder Egg Priority is not a simple task because the main character of the anime is a reclusive 14-year-old girl named Otoai who has no friends. She was constantly subjected to bullying at school because of her heterochromia. I did have one friend named Koito who one day simply approached her and said that the two of them should be friends. After some time, Koito commits suicide for an unknown reason. All of this occurs before the anime begins, and Ai has stopped going to school as a result. Mr. Sawaki, a teacher who works at a school, visits Ai's place on a regular basis to check up on her. One night, after burying a dead bug, a mysterious presence leads her somewhere before she wakes up the next morning to find a strange egg in her bed. Ai breaks this egg in a dream where a girl pops out. It turns out that this girl committed suicide, and these hostile entities known as Xeno-evils chase after her in this dreamscape. Another stronger entity known as a Wonder Killer appears, who Ai manages to defeat, releasing the Egg Girl. The purpose of all of this then becomes clear. The more girls Ai manages to save by breaking these eggs, the closer she gets to being able to see Koito again. 3 other girls named Neiru, Rika, and Momoe eventually become best friends with Ai as they bond over their collective goal of bringing somebody back via breaking these eggs. That was more or less a summary of episode 1, which goes to show that the mechanical aspects of how Wonder Egg's world operates are key, both for better and worse. The main girls go to the secret garden with the Wonder Egg gacha machines. The eggs open in dreams to present a young girl who has committed suicide, and the main girls must help defend the Egg Girls from Xeno-evils and the Wonder Killers, fantastical reimaginings of the people that drove the Egg Girls to suicide. The anime is formulaic. This process that I just described is going to be something you see over and over and over by My count, it happens 9 times, which you could bump up to 10, I guess, because one instance involves saving 2 girls at once. Formulaic, however, doesn't directly translate to repetitive. Every egg girl has their own specific backstories and traumas and relationships with their respective wonder killers, and the anime tries its best to touch upon different difficult subjects across these instances, and most importantly, the main girl involved with rescuing a specific egg girl almost always has a vital lesson they take away from watching and listening to their traumatic stories. I can't say that I find all of these to be successful, because some of these issues egg girls face are larger, more societal ones like gender issues, and trying to then compress that larger issue into the fault of a single person feels like the anime doesn't quite understand the scope of the issue it's brought up. Of course, none of it is offensively bad, and these never read to me as ignorant or insensitive. Of them all, 2 of these specifically stand out to me as unique. There's one in episode 6 where Ai has to protect a girl who claims to see things that nobody else can. Turns out that the wonder killer in this episode happens to be invisible, and Ai just gets punched around by seemingly nothing. The girl claims to see spirits, yet the physical manifestation of her trauma is something nobody else can see. Ai takes the girl's beads as a signifier of her finally believing in her words, and the killer finally appears before her, who is also surprised to see that somebody else can also see them. The overly literal approach to this scenario is a twist to the formula that I like quite a bit, especially at the end when the killer is also surprised. The dreamscape scenario in episode 5 is the one that stands as the most surreal of them all. The girl that Neiru is trying to protect still wants to die, and preaches all that is good about dying to Neiru, a temptation of death, if you will. The girl goes on and on about how you should aim to stay young and pretty, and that it's better to just die while pretty instead of desperately trying to claw back your beauty as you grow older. The little mop gremlin wonder killers that dance around Neiru the entire time can't be killed either, which creates this awfully suffocating feeling to the entire scenario, as it seems like no progress can be made. The twist is that the egg girl herself is the wonder killer. More specifically, it's the girl's hair. She became so obsessed with the preservation of her own image that she was her own worst enemy. When Neiru shoots the girl's hair off, the scenario comes to an end. I think these 2 dreamscape scenarios are by far and away the best moments in Wonder Egg Priority, and it's not even close. Both provide generally interesting plot twists to the core formula while also having the most fascinating atmosphere. These are also the moments in which the anime veers closest to horror, which works well for the formula, I think. The visuals in the dreamscape are also quite nice. There's a good mix of grounded realism and magical girl fantasy that creates a charming aesthetic, and the fights in the anime are a visual treat. As freaky as they are, I think the wonder killers are designed well, with them being overly monstrous while still retaining some tiny specks of realism. There are moments of interactions between the various characters that I enjoyed too. Ai asking Neiru about going to a burger shop is great because it's clear from the get-go that Ai has no idea what people do when they go to a burger shop. Later on, Ai invites her friends over to her place and her mother is overjoyed to see them, which embarrasses Ai. I enjoy stuff like this quite a bit. I like it when characters are awkward and scenes are built around this fact to organically showcase their awkwardness instead of deliberately trying to force them into excessively uncomfortable situations. And that's, unfortunately, where all of my general positivity with Wonder Egg Priority ends. It's awfully short, and I feel bad that it's short, but I would rather it be short than try to take things I'm lukewarm on and spin them into positives to bloat that part of the video. It's something I used to do a lot of my older videos, and frankly, it's still something I have to watch myself on because I know that it's disingenuous and leads to projects I'm unhappy with. Like I said at the top of this video, the biggest takeaway from all of this should be that I am not the right person to be talking about Wonder Egg Priority. In many ways, Wonder Egg Priority is an unfinished product. The shadow that hangs over all of Wonder Egg is the production issues that plague this anime. It's no secret that the anime had problems behind the scenes. While I haven't done particularly thorough research on the matter, what little I did see told stories of episodes being finished hours before they aired and people ending up hospitalized. When watching Wonder Egg, it becomes very obvious when the anime just can't keep up with itself anymore. Episode 8 is, from start to finish, an entirely uninterrupted recap episode. Having little bits of recap here and there in episodes to fill out a few minutes isn't an issue for me, but a whole episode in a single season schedule screams problems. It gets even worse when you watch the 48-minute special episode that came out a season later just to see that the first half of it is recap again. Whatever story the anime wanted to tell was never told, not just because it was unfinished, but also because it wasn't properly planned out in the first place. A feeling that I got as more of Wonder Egg simmered in my brain over time is that it feels as though every episode after the first few were written independently of one another, as if writing for an episode began right after the production for the previous episode finished. Episodes 11, 12, and the special episode are obviously the most incriminating examples of how this negatively impacts the entire experience, but a lot of the episodes in the middle of the anime show symptoms of this as well. Very little spills over between episodes. Most dreamscape egg-breaking scenarios are contained within the episodes they begin in, and they are hardly ever talked about outside of their respective episodes. And then there's a lot of slice-of-life segments showcasing the main cast of 4 girls that populate these episodes, which also don't spread out into other episodes. There's 3 particular examples of this disconnected writing that bother me a lot. In episode 6, Rika and Momoe get into a huge argument over Mr. Sawaki's relationship with Koito. Rika accuses him of sexual assault, and Momoe, being Mr. Sawaki's niece, is obviously upset to hear this and fires back with some deeply personal insults. I like this fight in isolation because both of them go gloves off and fight dirty. But episode 7 begins and these two are simply back to being friends again and celebrating Rika's birthday. There is no lasting impact this deeply emotional fight with no resolution has on their relationship. And this would be fine if there was any indication of these characters talking it out or even reflecting upon it, but that just doesn't happen. It's as if whatever happened at the end of episode 6 simply doesn't matter for episode 7. The second example is at the end of episode 9. Rika and Momoe discover that Aka and Ura-Aka, the 2 guys responsible for running the secret Wonder Egg Garden, are seen talking directly to Neidu's secretary. In episode 10, they actually address this fact by having Rika and Ai confront the Akas about this. Neidu then rolls up and reveals that these 2 are the founders of Japan Plati, the genius society that Neidu belongs to. But Rika and Ai get distracted by Neidu having gotten her hair done, and then they get distracted a second time when Momoe informs them that she got asked out by a boy. They go skipping out of the garden while singing Girls Talk, and Aka comments that Girls Talk takes priority. The girls do not continue this confrontation again. The second example is far worse than the first because you can see that episode 9 ending on a cliffhanger forces episode 10 to respond to it, but the response is just the worst thing ever because it doesn't even actually resolve the cliffhanger. It just brings it up, then says that's good enough before sweeping it under the rug and proceeding with the rest of 10 like it never happened. Girls Talk takes priority is a line stained with such irony that it reads like a satire of itself. Then there's the third example. At the end of episode 6, Ai comes to some sort of internal realization that motivates her to go sprinting through the rain all the way back to school to go declare to Mr. Sawaki that she wants to go back to school. Ai not going to school is a big deal. She doesn't go to school because of a specific trauma caused by her previously only friend's suicide. Mr. Sawaki visits her home on a very regular basis to check up on her, and Mr. Sawaki in general is just a very important figure to Ai. Her reclusive lifestyle is an important part of the anime because it sets a point of contrast to her becoming more outgoing and energetic as she continues to interact with her new friends. So if Ai not going to school is a big deal, then Ai going back to school is similarly a big deal. The anime agrees as well, since it takes 1 minute and 37 seconds for Ai to walk out of the door, sprint through the rain, and declare her plan of going back to school to Mr. Sawaki before it cuts to credits. Yet there isn't a single second of footage of her being back in school until the special episode. In episode 7, when somebody asks her how school went, she just says that it was okay and that's all we ever hear of it. While this disconnect between episodes isn't quite as bad as episode 9's cliffhanger, I think it is the strongest case for many episodes being written entirely independent of one another. The formulaic structure is partially responsible for this. The anime needs to find ways to return to the egg-breaking dreamscape scenario since that is what's most unique about Wonder Egg Priority. A formulaic structure can have its benefits. By setting up a comfortable pattern, it gives you a workable foundation for most chapters of a story without having to build every part of it from scratch each time you want to move on. Formulas also don't have to be rigid, and a good baseline will allow for flexibility within the repetition. Wonder Egg does this well enough with its dreamscapes, and maybe my all-time favorite example of this flexibility within repetition is 100 Girlfriends out of all things. But a formulaic structure can also lead to stagnation, which is a trap Wonder Egg falls into. An important thing to talk about is the endgame of the anime. What exactly does it envision its ending as? Ultimately, it is all about Koito. The whole reason Ai takes on this role of an eggbreaker is to find out what really happened to Koito. The entire anime is built around this mystery, and many speculations and accusations are thrown about in regards to it. The subject of the true nature of the relationship between Koito and Mr. Sawaki is one that lingers across several episodes, even resulting in certain characters getting into very heated arguments over it. Mr. Sawaki is put under a lot of accusatory spotlights during this process, and his motivations are kept under wraps as perspectives on him bounce back and forth between positive and negative. We don't really know why Koito asked to be friends with Ai in the first place. There's layers of complexity to this friendship as shown by the moment in which Ai stood back and enabled a bunch of bullies to harass Koito, and Koito responds to this by giving a very mild answer like she expected Ai to behave this way. There's a lot of nuance to Koito's existence in Wonder Egg, yet so little comes of it throughout the anime. We mostly get baseless speculations that don't go anywhere. Admittedly, the anime makes it clear that it wants to give all four of its main girls their fair share of spotlight, so it would be unreasonable for me to demand every episode to give me something about Koito. But what the anime went with provides so little that you can only make speculations about these speculations. In episode 10, Ai directly asks Mr. Sawaki about what happened to Koito, and this answer isn't given until the special episode, and the reveal of this in the special episode is absolutely worth talking about. It's not a rabbit hole I want to jump down just yet. The lack of any meaningful story progression throughout most of Wonder Egg Priority is the main culprit behind why I began to lose interest in it before I was slapped in the face by the last few episodes. The anime defaults to the dreamscape scenario over and over and over, and while these were interesting at first, them being paired with nothing else going on in the story made them stagnant. Now that I think about it, is probably why the one in episode 6 sticks out to me so much, because it was the last one I was truly interested in viewing. There is one other aspect of Wonder Egg that I think could be pointed to as an axis of progression for the story, which would be watching the main cast become friends. A large part of Wonder Egg Priority is watching these friendless girls make friends, and make friends they do, but this too follows a formula. I will meet one of the girls destined to join the main cast. Their first interaction is a little rocky or awkward, but once they've gotten over it and the next episode begins, they've basically become best friends. Way back when I first watched Wonder Egg Priority, this was something I jotted down as a positive, that it was nice to see progression in these characters' relationships. But I've since then come to realize that there really isn't any meaningful progression in these friendships. They're all a two-step process, going from being strangers to best friends. A lack of story progression wouldn't necessarily be a big deal if the anime had never set expectations for it. If they never established a goal for Ai in episode 1, then a lack of progress on that goal wouldn't be disappointing, and it wouldn't feel as if Wonder Egg Priority was losing steam and sputtering after its halfway point. But this lack of story progression is something that Wonder Egg seems aware of, because it attempts to rectify this issue with its last 3 episodes. The ending of Wonder Egg Priority is a consequence of it trying to make sense of itself. It attempts to deconstruct the mechanics of its own world and explain how it all works and how it all began, and make no mistake, the anime absolutely deconstructs its own narrative, just maybe not in the way that it intended to. Everything the anime worked hard to build crumbles to dust in the most fascinating way possible. Somehow, episode 11 and the special episode make bad decisions that you didn't even know were possible. The anime doesn't just have loose ends it ignores until the end. It adamantly refuses to address these and puts more effort into this refusal than just leaving them ignored. What feel like critically important characters and concepts are thrown in at the last minute in ways that completely upend the story and make you question everything you've been watching. The whole thing becomes retroactively cheap and flimsy. Welcome to the ending of Wonder Egg Priority. We have 3 episodes to cover, episodes 11, 12, and the special episode. And as much as I hate to do this, we'll need to begin with a recap of episode 11 because there's a lot to talk about. It all begins with the end of episode 10. Momoe successfully clears her game and finally gets to see Haruka, the girl she's been trying to resurrect. While she does see Haruka, Haruka instantly disappears and some sort of a demon creature named Hyphen appears. Hyphen says that she'd rather not kill Momoe if it wasn't for somebody named Frill before killing Momoe's magic turtle pet, eating part of it, then force-feeding some of it to Momoe. Episode 11 begins, and the same exact sequence of events occurs to Erika, except the demon creature that comes after her is named Dot. Ai visits the garden late at night and meets Uraaka, who begins to explain the story as to how the eggs came to be. Aka and Uraaka were once humans who were brilliant scientists, and one day, out of boredom, began to work on creating an AI teenage daughter. They succeed, and the AI teenage daughter decides to name itself Frill. As time goes by, Frill develops a habit of making a popping sound with her lips. They are one big happy family for a while before Aka falls in love with a woman. The two get married, and the woman becomes pregnant. During this time, Frill grows jealous as Aka's attention is placed away from her. Frill asks to have some new friends made, but she's in control of the process this time, resulting in Hyphen, Dot, and a third one that appears in episode 12 named Kirara Rodriguez Matured 18th Evening Star SS Plum. Got it. Frill kills Aka's wife, resulting in her being thrown into some underground locker in the basement of the house by an enraged Aka. While the wife is dead, the child survives, and now the two Akas have a human daughter named Himari. Himari grows just fine, but on the night that she becomes 14, makes the exact same popping sound that Frill used to make before committing suicide shortly thereafter. Uraaka opens up the locker to find out that Frill is hooked up to a bunch of computers before dragging Frill out to some undisclosed location and presumably destroying her once and for all. The two Akas begin to dedicate all their time and effort into researching the suicides of girls in that age range. While there were many causes, they wondered if there could be another push that drove them to suicide, and the conclusion is the temptation of death, and that girls will keep dying when they don't have to until this is stopped. The Wonder Eggs were created in an attempt to interfere with this process. The 11th episode out of a 12-episode season is a hell of a place to decide to exposition dump and deconstruct your own narrative, since there's so little time left to do anything with all of this new information. All of this information wasn't even teased at all, so there would have been no way for the viewer to anticipate a plot twist like this. Outside of ridiculously brief moments that are more like coincidences than foreshadowing, everything in episode 11 absolutely blindsides the viewer. It's easy to say in hindsight that nobody asked for this, but I can still remember reacting very negatively to this episode the first time I saw it. Prior to the plot twist at the end of episode 10, I never found myself questioning the existence of the Wonder Eggs or what Aka and Uraaka were up to. These things and people were parts of the story that simply existed so that the rest of it can function. They were narrative devices, and that was fine. There were no signs of a central villain anywhere, no signs of a unifying antagonistic force pulling the strings. I would have no trouble sleeping at night not knowing anything about these because there are other, more interesting parts of the story worth focusing on. The anime, however, clearly disagrees on all of this, which is why we have episode 11. Episode 11, being where it is, was destined to fail. No matter how you could have reorganized or changed the presentation of episode 11's story points, I don't think there could be any way for it to exist in harmony with the rest of the anime. Basically, none of it is mentioned in the episodes prior to the plot twist at the end of 10, and Frill's name is never spoken once during this time. Episode 12, on the other hand, almost entirely steers clear of a lot of episode 11's content. Because the anime special episode needed to come out months later, it seems like 12 was entirely rebuilt from the ground up to provide some amount of closure before piecing out for a season. There's traces of 11 in there, but not so much that it feels like an actual continuation. The special episode is similar to 12 in that it ignores much of what 11 has to offer outside of bits and pieces. So, episode 11 is by itself. It is an entirely isolated part of the story, and it sticks out like a sore thumb in doing so. With none of the anime being written in a way to support this episode, of course it was going to land flat on its face. When looking at 11 alone, the Frill story isn't terrible. I don't think it's anything special, but, it's fine. But one of the weirdest things about 11 and Frill's backstory is this popping sound Frill makes with her mouth that the anime fixates on, with it zooming in on her lips every time she makes the sound like a weird killer calling card. The night that Himari dies, Himari also makes this noise while talking to Uraaka, and Uraaka stares in horror. That night, Himari commits suicide, and Uraaka cannot figure out the cause of this suicide. He contemplates a variety of factors ranging from bullying at school to problems at home, but nothing makes sense to him. And that about summarizes the single most problematic aspect of the entire Frill ordeal. All things considered, everything in Humanity's life seemed pretty alright, given that the anime doesn't point towards any signs of trouble. So this really does imply that the only reason the girls commit suicide is because Frill influences them to do so, and that any other factors in life are not relevant to this outcome. In fact, it's almost as if the anime suggests that perhaps Frill possesses her victims in some way, shape, or form, even if it is just partially so. The popping sound is such a specific little behavior for Humani to replicate that it has to be something like this. The fact that the suicides of all these girls is now the fault of a single individual completely devalues the struggles of each of the girls that the anime tried to display. For each and every egg girl that is saved by the main characters, there is an attempt to personalize each conflict and give them some depth. When the anime says that it was all Frill's fault, however, these all lose meaning. The individual struggles of every one of these girls doesn't matter anymore because at the end of the day, Frill tempted them with death, and that now becomes the root cause of all these scenarios. They all circle the same drain. We don't even get a glimpse as to how this process occurs in real time. Exactly how Frill influences girls into taking their lives remains a complete mystery. If it explicitly stated that Frill specifically targets vulnerable girls to accomplish her goals, then that alone would at least give us something to latch onto. Even the entire existence of Wonder Killers becomes pointless because the anime claimed that these were the people responsible for the girls committing suicide before Frill rolls up and steals their jobs. For all we know, she could just be spinning a roulette to pick her next victim. This decision to shovel all of the responsibility onto Frill is the single most self-destructive thing about the anime's ending. It strips away the human element, the central villain is literally an AI, from each and every girl's struggles and homogenizes them into a poorly explained, cheaply constructed murder mystery. The decision to feature such a warping component of the anime's narrative so late in the story is beyond me. To be completely honest, I don't think it would be any better if it was featured early, because all that would do is take the retroactively out of retroactively cheap and flimsy. Things like the recap episode or slice of life being used to stuff the runtime of episodes could pretty safely be pinned as production issues, but episode 11 is just an issue with the writing. In the best case scenario, I think traces of the Frill stuff would need to be placed into pretty much every episode so that there's at least a reasonable amount of foreshadowing, and temptation of death should have been a core aspect of it all, but that requires a restructuring of essentially every single part of Wonder Egg, since all of the egg girls that the main cast saves would need to have their story overhauled and rebuilt around the existence of Frill. Eventually, there was this one homebrewed conspiracy theory that I came up with and sat on for a while, one that would try to serve as a definitive piece of evidence that Frill was a deeply planned component of Wonder Egg from the beginning. At the end of episode 10, one of Frill's minions appears in front of Moa and kills her little Pokemon alligator. The same happens to Rika's turtle, but in episode 11. These magical critters that were given to the egg breakers served genuinely no purpose prior to their deaths. They kill haters, but haters are functionally identical to see-no-evils. They don't do anything unique and just chase people around. The anime might want to claim that they do something different, but no, they don't. So the Pokemons are created as this unnecessary solution to an unnecessary problem added to the core formula of the Dreamscape scenarios. Frill is introduced really late into the story, and due to her late appearance, Frill needs some way to immediately add a lot of threat to her presence so that people might care about her. A really quick and dirty way of making someone threatening is by having them maliciously kill someone. However, it seems like the anime didn't want to kill any of the main girls, so it needed some other being it could kill. Put two and two together, and it seems like the entire reason the pocket monsters were even added to the story was for them to be killed off, and the anime needs some method of justifying their existence besides to kill them, which is where haters came from. It seems convenient, right? It finds a way to connect all of these disparate little pointless additions to the anime into a somewhat cohesive chain, like a nesting doll made of exclusively bad decisions, a single bad decision requiring other pointless decisions to cover up its tracks. And while it'd be fun and a little validating if this ended up being true, I don't really believe in it anymore. Truth be told, the feeling of episodes being written independently of one another has kind of replaced this, just hopping from one conspiracy to another really. I'm still unsure as to whether or not Frill was supposed to be included in the story from the beginning. I'd like to believe she was there from the start and they just poorly planned out her inclusion. But on the flip side, maybe when writing Wonder Egg Priority there was a sense that if the story stuck to the girls breaking eggs episode after episode, that there would be no way to have a conclusive ending, so they tried to cram an antagonist into the existing framework, but what ends up happening is they bend and twist the framework to wrap it around the antagonist instead of trying a smoother integration. They realized that this wouldn't work out, so the anime basically erased all of it for episode 12 and the special episode. But, I mean, the ending feels like it's right there. Every single one of the main girls has a very clear, very personalized goal to see a specific person in their life again. The fact that the people the main characters worked so hard to bring back get disintegrated moments after the curtain drops is frankly kind of disrespectful to both the main characters and the viewers. I thought it was an interesting plot twist at first, but in hindsight I just don't like it. It's like the anime signaling that the things we've been working towards all these episodes weren't that important to begin with. Every single one of the main girls could have been given an opportunity for a proper reunion with the person they're trying to save. Maybe they fight a giant boss wonder killer highly personalized to personify the conflict that the main character feels in regards to the person they try to bring back. Each girl could get their own dedicated episode, so you just begin to wind down from episode 9 onwards, with 12 being the big finale for I feel like it's right there. It seems so obvious that I feel like I'm going crazy when I think about it, and this insanity is made even worse by the existence of episode 12 because it is exactly the ending I just described. Episode 12 is a curious talking point in Wonder Egg. While 11 and the special episodes are taking a sledgehammer to the anime's foundation, 12 is just kind of there, watching, not participating in the destruction, but also not doing anything to stop the others. I wouldn't say that there's anything in 12 that's outright terrible, but there isn't anything here that's great either. I would never say that I like this episode, but I would also never say that I don't like it. 12 is like an avant-garde take on the traditional Wonder Egg formula over anything else. It barely feels like a continuation of episode 11, and the ending simultaneously does and does not bring closure to the main season. As I said earlier, I get the feeling that episode 12 was redone in order to bring some amount of closure to Wonder Egg before it had to go away for a season to work on the special episode. That's the only thing I can think of when it comes to the official introduction of parallel universes into the framework. The central focus of this episode revolves around I breaking an egg to find out that the girl inside is also I. Turns out that the second I is from a parallel universe where she was never friends with Koito and ended up taking her own life, and the Wonder Killer in this episode is Mr. Sawaki, not actually Mr. Sawaki, but rather an image of Mr. Sawaki conjured up by Ai's fears and doubts. In order for me to begin talking about episode 12, I need to be entirely truthful and admit that I don't get it. Well, not like I get much of this anime, but I don't get this one especially. I do not understand what episode 12 is trying to achieve for Ai's character. Part of me wants to write it off as just being vague symbolic nonsense that there is no actually significant messaging to the episode, but the delivery is just obscure enough to mask that fact, and the viewer can simply write the meaning of the episode for themselves. But the other part of me wants to give the anime the benefit of the doubt. Just because I don't get it doesn't mean that the episode carries no substance, but the anime proudly introducing parallel universes into the mix doesn't do it any favor. Episode 12 isn't actually the first time parallel universes are mentioned in Wonder Egg. That prestigious award goes to episode 9, where it's briefly mentioned when Neiru meets Kotobuki in the dreamscape, so technically speaking, the anime did set this up in advance. However, that's the only episode in which it's mentioned prior to this one, and even there, it's mostly brought up in passing as Kotobuki just declares that parallel universes are real. That, in and of itself, raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? For example, if the second eye was from a parallel universe where any of the other egg girls from parallel universes? I think probably not, but in that case, how come I is the only one to receive the special treatment of getting to meet her parallel self? Surely there must be other parallel versions of the girls who took their own lives that probably deserve to be met in order to face their personal demons, right? Heck, how did the Akas even manage to connect their present reality to a parallel universe through a Wonder Egg? Are these eggs just connected to just one parallel universe, or all of them? All these questions might make it seem like I think the whole parallel universe bit is bad. While I think it's kind of silly, the execution of it is not particularly great here. I actually think the idea is good. Earlier I said that Wonder Egg could have had an ending where each of the main girls got a full episode dedicated to them as the anime approached its end to give each and every girl their own personalized sense of closure. 12 isn't quite exactly what I would have liked, but I think it still serves as a workable prototype of that idea. Have Each girl meet a parallel universe bad ending version of themselves and use this opportunity to finally overcome their inner demons. So I do want to give 12 some amount of credit for this fact. There are a few weird little quirks about episode 12 that make watching it kind of weird. It doesn't make it hard to watch, but something about the whole episode is just a little bit off. Momoe says to Ai, "It was chosen for me. Why did you call out to me?" I have to assume that it here means the whole egg breaking ordeal, and Momoe implies that becoming an egg breaker was brought upon her by guilt rather than volition. Fair enough, but the part that confuses me is the "why did you call out to me" part. I can only guess that this is supposed to mean that Momoe blames Ai for the death of her magic alligator, claiming that if Ai didn't reach out to Momoe in the first place, then all would be fine. This is obviously flawed logic, which is why it confuses me so much, since Frill didn't send out one of her minions explicitly because Momoe was associated with Ai. If Momoe completed her mission without ever having met Ai, the alligator would probably still have died. "You changed your hairpin." This line is spoken by none other than Koito after she pulls the reality Ai out of the pool after she falls in, and the Wonder Killer stains the water with some dimension warping green paint. So this is an illusion, I imagine. In it, the Wonder Killer talks about how being an adult is dirty, but being young is pure, so you should die before you become a filthy, greedy adult. You could even call it a temptation of death. Ooh. I thought... The reason why the hairpin line drove me insane for a little bit was because initially I thought it implied that this Koito was from the parallel universe and that reality Ai was transported into the parallel universe to experience things from parallel Ai's perspective. I mean, maybe that is what they were trying to go for, but the only reason why I don't think so anymore is that parallel Ai has no friends, and if a detail from the special episode is anything to go by, parallel Koito shouldn't know parallel Ai well enough to notice a different hairpin, but yeah, that line was agonizing the first time I noticed it. Here's just one more oddity. Near the end of episode 12, one of Frill's minions comes out and attacks. At first, we don't get to see which Ai gets attacked. The one with the green hairpin is from the present reality, and the one with the cross is from the parallel universe. The present Ai wakes up in reality with both her eyes intact and claims that parallel Ai protected her. Back in the dream, the parallel Ai has both of her eyes, while the reality Ai is injured on the ground with both her eyes closed. Parallel Ai eventually gets around to saying thank you before it cuts to reality, which then cuts back to the dream where parallel Ai is on the floor missing an eye before poofing out of existence. I honestly couldn't tell you if there's a message clumsily hidden in here somewhere or if it's just an animation error. In the grand scheme of things, these are irrelevant complaints, barely blips on the radar. But the only reason why these little quirks don't really matter is because they don't engage with what 11 tried to set up, and I can't decide if that benefits or harms Wonder Egg priority. You could argue that trying to stay clean of episode 11's mess and pretending that it doesn't exist is for the best because there was no way to salvage it. Don't sink to its level and try to make the best of what you can. But then not addressing the mess means that it's still there. It's still stinking up the place, and all you've done is create a momentary diversion. The large amount of detachment between these two episodes is ultimately more of 11's fault than it is 12's, since 11 decided to open up the can of worms in the first place, and 12 just gently pushed it aside. With the core of 12 ignoring most of 11, now all we have is some extremely rushed plot about a rogue AI tempting girls into suicide. We don't conclusively know what ultimately happened to Frill. We don't even know why injuries and dreams carry over to reality. 11 made things so much worse because they tried to explain stuff instead of not bothering at all and just silently using dream logic to keep things moving. If 11 never bothered trying to explain how these dreamscapes and eggs came to be, then who gives a shit? It just works, and that's all that there would be to it. But now that the can of worms has been opened up and poured out, nobody wants to clean it up, and the whole room is a mess. The intent of 12 is pretty clear: to bring some level of closure to Wonder Egg before going on break. Ai addressing her own personal demons and saving a copy of herself feels like it does that. Reality Ai gets parallel Ai to admit the fact that she regrets taking her own life. Reality Ai declares out loud that she's going to believe, I assume in herself, before destroying the Wonder Killer. After that declaration, she makes another declaration that she's going to become a warrior of arrows to fight Thanatos, the temptation of death, with the promise that she'll bring Parallel Eye back to life at some point. After this is when they get attacked by Frill's minion and the episode ends. It's all empowering and cute stuff. Good for both eyes, but even in this episode's attempt to provide closure before going away for a while, I feel that episode 12 does the exact opposite, placing the anime in this ambiguous, unfinished, and frustrating position. This is all thanks to the anime's refusal to address the topic of Koito in this episode. At the end of 10, Ai asks Mr. Sawaki about the details surrounding Koito's suicide, where we don't get to hear the answer, so the ending to 10 remains a big old mystery. And not only do we not get to find out what happened, we also don't know how Ai feels about the truth. One can only assume that whatever she heard from Mr. Sawaki here is what motivates her to go to the garden at night in episode 11, maybe even right after the art gallery visit. But if we set this assumption aside, there's just nothing that comes of this, similar to how there's nothing to come of the big reveal that Ai wants to go back to school at the end of episode 6. 12 tries to write it off as Ai realizing that maybe she never wanted to hear the truth from Koito, but this just isn't a satisfying answer to me because until this point it never felt like the anime even tried to get an answer about Koito, and the answer we do eventually get is awful, which just drags down this particular moment as an afterthought. So let's talk about that answer, then let's finally talk about the special episode. The special episode aired one season after episode 12. 12 aired in March of 2021, while the special episode aired in June of 2021, taking up 2 episodes worth of time when it did air. The special episode has a lot of weight on its shoulders thanks to 11's shenanigans and 12 not really addressing these shenanigans, and unfortunately, it fails to deliver. And this failure is pretty fucking extreme, but it's also fascinating at the same time. Not only does the special episode fail to answer most of the questions raised by the anime, it also decides to raise a bunch of new questions that of course go unanswered, and as a result, you're going to see me talk about the special episode through a lot of conjectures and guesswork because there really isn't much here that's concrete. The goal of this episode is pretty clear to me. It feels like an attempt to bury everything that came before it and end on the most insipid, milquetoast note possible. Just pretend that the story never blew up and that all those loose ends we didn't address never existed. Look at the cute girl throwing you a cute smile and only remember this, please. The irony of this situation is that the special episode begins with a recap that eats up the first half of the entire thing, so I guess we can start with that then. The first half of the special episode you would have waited 3 months for is a recap, and it's not even done in an interesting way. It's literally just footage taken from the first 12 episodes. Having one full recap episode in a single season anime is already pretty bad, but having a second full recap taking up another episode's worth of time is even worse. Even if you didn't hear anything about the behind-the-scenes problems with Wonder Egg, just these recap episodes alone reek of production issues, and the anime cannot shake off this stench even until the bitter end. As I've said, the irony of the recap in the special episode stems from the episode's original content wanting to sweep everything under the rug, and it begins this process by reminding you of everything that happened. And the best example of this has to be with how the anime decides to wrap up everything related to Koito. Turns out that Koito at a previous school caused problems with a male teacher that led to that teacher's suicide. At the present school, Koito regularly contacted Mr. Sawaki and asked him to come to the roof one day, threatening to jump off if Mr. Sawaki didn't show up. While shouting from the rooftop that Mr. Sawaki had raped her, Koito slips and falls to her death while nobody was watching. So the problem here with this answer is twofold. Number 1, her death was an accident, and number 2, it retroactively casts Koito as a terrible person. One of the most important, if not the most important, structural component of Wonder Egg priority is the reason why Koito committed suicide. We already went over all of this quite some time ago. There's speculations made, accusations thrown, and layers of complexity to the friendship between her and Ai wrapped in a cloud of mysterious motivations. The only reason why Ai begins breaking eggs is to talk to Koito and hear the reasoning. There's a lot of speculation surrounding this from other people, and even episode 12 makes it a point to bring up the fact that maybe Ai doesn't want to hear the truth. But none of these questions, speculations, and accusations end up amounting to anything, thanks to how decisively they decided to tie up this loose end. It's not even really trying to tie up a loose end. It's more like cutting off the loose end and then saying, no more questions to the audience before moving along with how this reveal is just slipped in there so unceremoniously. Ai doesn't even have anything to say about this fact. She gives no reaction to this revelation, but it doesn't matter since Koito was a terrible person anyways. The reveal that Koito was a terrible person is maybe the most fascinating and frustrating part about all of this, because it indicates to me that the anime wants the viewer to stop thinking about this character entirely. It's like the anime doesn't want you to feel bad about this character being dead because Koito caused the suicide of one person and tried to replicate that behavior, and you shouldn't feel pity for terrible people, and because her death was an accident, they don't have to bother writing any issues or struggles for Koito that the viewer might even slightly feel sympathy for. For bonus points, Koito does not remember anything about being friends with Ai since she's from a parallel universe where they were never friends, and thus gives Ai the coldest of shoulders as she approaches. So there's another reason why you shouldn't feel bad about Koito, and if you don't feel bad about Koito dying, then you also shouldn't feel bad about the anime sweeping the entire thing under the rug, and don't forget about that moment in episode 12 when Ai said that maybe she didn't want to hear the truth from Koito. In episode 12, it's written as this major moment when Ai is finally letting go and moving on with her life, no longer shackled down by this traumatic event, but that moment gets completely ruined in hindsight because now we know that she says this after having heard the answer from Mr. Sawaki. I feel like the most generous interpretation that could stem from this is that she's in denial after having heard the answer and wanted to hear the truth from the source before letting go, but this feels like massive coping to me. It's clearly not structured to be interpreted in this way with how the special episode is just loosely stapled on at the end. Even if the intent was for it to be interpreted this way, it does a very poor job at it. The matter of fact is, we don't know how Ai feels about Mr. Sawaki's answer. We didn't know about it in episode 12, and we still don't know about it in the special episode, so the best we can do is simply assume that she's in denial based off of whatever you want. The anime gives you nothing to go by. The answer is so baffling that it reads to me as if the anime never had any plans for Koito the entire time and scribbled something in at the last minute for the special episode. The reveal of Mr. Sawaki's answer about Koito might be the single most infuriating thing in the entire special episode. It takes everything the anime had worked hard to try and build towards and throws it right into the dumpster because there was just no more time left to finish it. It's sad, but astoundingly so. Something I briefly mentioned just a minute ago was that Koito gave Ai the cold shoulder. By extension, the other girls revived by Momoe and Rika did the exact same to their respective saviors. Maybe not exactly the cold shoulder, but it seems as if the girls Momoe and Rika brought back are now entirely detached from their lives. Turns out that the revived girls are just parallel universe copies that have been cut and pasted into the reality we're watching, which would explain why they don't recognize the people who saved them. Another thing that this would explain is how the special episode can skimp out on the effort of having to come up with a moment of these characters reuniting and airing out their true feelings, just another way to forget about the thing that the anime tried to build towards. There's also questions of if there are even consequences of these dead people coming back to life. Was every single person's memory in this reality, with the exception of the egg breakers, edited so that these suicides didn't happen and that the girls never knew their saviors? The anime clearly thought about this because Ai mentions that it creates a little noise in their lives when these people come back, and the pictures of Koito on Ai's phone are gone too. The anime does enough to indicate that it acknowledges this part of the special episode, but not enough to dissuade further questions, and, what even happens in the parallel universes the girls get pulled out of? Are those parallel universes now just short one person? Do they get body swapped with the corpses in the reality we know? That's for you, dear viewers, to decide. This parallel universe shit in episode 12 in the special episode does so much work to tangle the pre-existing narrative over anything else. Ultimately, it feels more like Ai got pulled into a parallel universe rather than a parallel Koito being dropped into the present reality. And now that we've brought up parallel universes again, we should finally talk about Kotobuki. Kotobuki made her debut back in episode 9. She is another one of the children made by Japan Plotty, just like Neido is. Kotobuki experimented with getting as close to death as possible over and over until she one day actually crossed the line and ended up in a vegetative state. The main body of episode 9 centers around Neido getting a bit of closure as she makes the decision to pull Kotobuki's life support. Kotobuki's the one. God, that name is hard to say. Kotobuki's the one that introduces parallel universes into the mix through a fairly whelming mention of it in episode 9. It's not until episode 12 in the special episode that parallel universes gain more significance. Kotobuki makes her return in the special episode where her only purpose is to help deliver a very specific bit of news to Ai and Ika. However, she isn't the same one that died in episode 9. That one is still dead, and the Kotobuki we meet in the special episode is from a parallel universe who made it to the present reality when the Kotobuki there died. Unlike the other parallel universe girls that were brought into the present reality, Kotobuki seems fully aware of what is going on and who everybody is. I did not realize how many times I wrote her name until I'm reading it out loud. Oh my god. The existence of Kotobuki in this episode raises some fascinating questions about parallel universes. Here, she says that she isn't dead, but rather that she came to this world because the Kotobuki here died, and that two of her can't exist at the same time. This implies any of the following. A. Somebody else was fighting for Kotobuki in the egg world. B. Neiru was lying when she said that she was fighting for her sister and was fighting for Kotobuki the entire time. C. Neiru somehow was able to fight for multiple people simultaneously, or D. That parallel Kotobuki managed to get into this universe all on her own. No, none of these make sense. If I had to pick one, then I would probably go with D, but that still doesn't make any sense since travel between parallel universes is never detailed anywhere. I guess the excuse is that in episode 9 she confirms that parallel universes exist, so a parallel universe Kotobuki could have just kept checking universe after universe to find she was dead in so that she could jump into that one. Why she wants to do this and why she specifically takes on the role of delivering the news to Rika and I is beyond me. Convenience is the easy answer, but just because it's easy doesn't mean it's satisfying. I feel like some iteration of the anime intended on Kotobuki to be a critically important character since parallel universes end up being a relevant component to the story, but her entire inclusion feels very poorly planned out. She's kind of like Frill in that if the thing she pertains to ends up being really important to the story, she probably should have been introduced a lot earlier to let the concept simmer. That would ensure their respective contributions to the story don't feel like last minute additions that absolutely derail everything like they do currently. So now we're left with the news that Kotobuki delivered to Rika and I, which is that Neiru is an AI construct not dissimilar to Frill. Neiru is an AI replica of a girl named Airu created by Kotobuki. Neiru clears her game and manages to save Airu, but Airu leaves her behind and Neiru remains trapped in the dream. She gets attacked by all three of Frill's minions, but before anything happens, Frill intercepts and says that the two of them can be friends and that she can grant Neiru's secret wish of becoming human. Neiru then fades away. As you might expect, the anime does not do a particularly good job at justifying this. It comes completely out of left field and imposes a variety of conundrums onto the story. For something small, the beginning of the special episode's original content involves Neiru/Airu, I'm still not sure who it is to be honest, talking to their feet about how they did their duty and that today onwards belongs to them. It would make sense if this was Neiru saying it after she cleared her game, but knowing that Neiru is trapped in the dream means that this probably isn't the case, and I guess it's supposed to imply that Airu has some ulterior motivation that we aren't privy to. The anime also gives Airu a tiny bit of special treatment by allowing her to have a short one-on-one conversation with Neiru at the moment of being rescued before peacing out. Adios. How come none of the other girls get this kind of luxury? Haruka, Chiemi, and Koito all just fade into dust. Their instant dematerialization kind of works in the sense of signifying the main girls moving on with their lives. It kind of does come off as lazy, but it still sort of works despite this. The only reason I can come up with this is that Airu gets the chance to talk just to make sure the viewer knows that she's a mean girl so that we can feel bad for Neiru, I suppose. But again, what does this accomplish? What does making us dislike Airu or feel bad for Neiru do for the story? After the revelation about Neiru has dropped and had a tiny bit of time to settle, I gets a phone call from Neiru, and of course, the reasonable reaction here is to toss your phone off your apartment balcony, and then shortly after go crying to your mom about how you did something awful and really hard and that you're sorry. I just found out that one of her best friends is not who you thought she was, or rather what you thought she was. We know that Ai cares very deeply for each and every one of her friends, so I find it to be rather out of character for her to deny herself this opportunity to find out more about this situation. She doesn't outwardly display any anger or resentment towards Nadu, and if this is supposed to be that, then so be it, I guess, even if this sentiment doesn't last. The purpose of throwing the phone feels like a quick and easy way to add a brief amount of tension without having to give it resolution or release of any form, but then why even have her go crying to her mom if that's the point? I possibly can't be crying about throwing her phone over the balcony and saying that she did something awful and really hard. I makes it sound like she hit an animal with a bike or something really serious like that. This moment can't be so shallow. The special episode is awful in many different ways, but even with that, I refuse to believe that I is this distraught over throwing her phone. But what else could it mean? Let's take one last dig at Frill before this video ends, because why not? Frill says that if Nado becomes friends with her, then she can become human. Is this explained? No, she's probably lying and using that to tempt Nadu, and that would be kind of cool if Nadu had shown any indication of this desire, but that would require the Nadu is an AI bit to have been deeper integrated into the story, and that's clearly not the case, so this point just crumbles to dust. And also, her 3 minions. They say that sacrificing your Pokemon means you get to live, but they don't ever explain why this is the case. It just is. This doesn't make sense to me since Frill is actively going around in dreams causing suicides through temptations of death. Her goal is to kill people, so I don't see why she'd want to take substitutions for this without a very good reason, and the anime doesn't provide a very good reason. Just another L for those little dudes. But let's set all of these aside and address the biggest question of them all. What happened to Nadu? And no, the answer I'm looking for isn't that she's trapped in the dream with Frill, but rather what happened to Nadu in the physical world. Nobody knows where Nadu went. She is nowhere to be seen. For all intents and purposes, her body could have poofed out of existence the moment she was trapped in the dream. But there's no precedence of that happening, so that possibly can't be it. That being said, there was no precedence for hopping between parallel universes, but that's here in the special episode, so I guess precedence means fuck all here. If I had to wager another guess in regards to this episode, it would be that the girl on the bus would be Nadu, and the girl talking to her feet at the start would also be Nadu. Nadu gets tempted with the promise of becoming human, so perhaps this provides a sense of newfound freedom that today belongs to her now, so she decides to simply disappear to God knows where, maybe the remnants of where Frill's body is located if you really want to go off the deep conspiratorial end. I'm sure the issue with the Nadu is an AI revelation is pretty obvious by now. I'm having to write the episode's story in its stead. This isn't piecing together scattered clues to puzzle together a finished narrative. There is no finished narrative, it is just guesswork. Watching the special episode is an exercise in patience more than anything as the anime twiddles its thumbs trying to fill the allotted time slot. Writing something for this episode has been a challenge, trying to cobble together things that seem even a little coherent and word them in a way that doesn't outright give away the fact that it has no substance to it. Even in the worst moments of the other 12 episodes, it at least felt like there was some amount of direction and an idea for every plot point. That doesn't mean it's good, far from it, but it at least felt like everything had a purpose. Even the terrible continuation of episode 9's cliffhanger in episode 10 could be written off as a sloppy cleaning effort. Even all of the filler recap episodes existed to try and buy some time for production. Even the horrendous inclusion of Frill at the last minute had its purpose of trying to provide a backstory, but the revelation of Nadu being an AI serves no purpose. It does nothing to the story. It doesn't even change the meaning of anything in hindsight to truly cheapen the things that came before it like the truth about Koito does. It is, in every metric, a waste of time. This topic has been, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most difficult things to write about in any video I've ever made because of how utterly inane it is. I could just write it all off as season 2 bait because that would be the easy thing to do, but I don't believe that for even a second. I don't think there's any shot this anime was going to get a season 2, and it looked like they internally recognized this too, what with the post-credits scene of the special episode having a picture of the main cast while everybody says "the end" in a real cheery tone. There is one last moment in the special episode I want to talk about before I wrap this video up. Ai moves to a new school and loses touch with all of her friends. She justifies this move by saying that there's no point in going to the old school anymore, and it's true. There is no point in the things that came before this episode. Let's just all put it behind us, forget that it ever existed, and move on with our lives. Ai seems to show no emotion about the fact that she's had to change schools and leave behind what should have been a transformative experience for her. And the way that this line is presented is so mundane, so boring. I do not expect Ai to be able to make new friends when she goes to a new school. After all, the only reason she was able to make friends with all of those other girls was because of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the eggs. The anime provides no signs of Ai making friends or even interacting with people outside of this circle, so it doesn't seem like her change in social skills propagated to the real world. It's effectively undone all the work it's put into building the different relationships with her friends that Ai had. Wonder Egg is back to square one. Ultimately, this is an irrelevant line, something not particularly noteworthy in the junk heap that is a special episode in the anime's ending, but the more I ended up mulling over this line, there was something to it that made it latch onto my brain, a sort of passive-aggressive vitriol boiling under the ordinary presentation. The outright mention of there being no point in the past rings loud and clear, but what about all of the effort that went into it from the people who cared, all of the struggles going on behind the scenes? All that for what? For all your hard work to be remembered by the masses as that anime with a god-awful ending? Just another gear to be lost within the industry machine? There is no point in going to the old school anymore has read to me as Wonder Egg's priorities bitter commentary of itself. All the effort that has gone into it doesn't matter anymore. I did not enjoy my time with Wonder Egg Priority. My initial reception was lukewarm before it turned to boredom and eventually drove off the cliff towards negativity. Clearly, it did not resonate with me in the same way that it did for many other people that love this anime, but I do not hate this anime. I feel bad for it in a way that I never have for any other piece of media I've experienced. It's why this video has been so difficult to make. Trying to convey this feeling in a way that doesn't sound patronizing or softening the criticisms has been a genuine challenge to me. And what I'm about to say is going to ring hollow because all this video realistically does is perpetuate this sentiment. It's a tragedy that so much of this anime's legacy has been bogged down by its ending. It's an ending that wants you to forget about everything you've seen. An ending that wants you to forget about Wonder Egg Priority. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please consider liking it and maybe even subscribing to the channel. Every little bit goes a long way. Hopefully this is the last version of the video and I won't have to make another iteration of this video moments before actually uploading it, because I am so glad to be done with it. This video, I am not happy with this video. I don't think there's ever going to be a Wonder Egg video that I will be happy with putting out, but this is, I think, as close as it's going to get. I'm more relieved that I'm done with it now rather than over anything else. But yeah, the next video is going to be on of all things, Lies of P. So it's going to be different. I don't know when it's going to come out. Hopefully not as long as it took to make this one. It's something different. I've never made it before, so I am excited to try it. But also kind of nervous because I've never made a video on a game before. So who knows how that'll pan out. But yeah, as I've said, thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next video.